At 4:40 a.m., the sky roared. German planes appeared without warning. Bombs fell on Weilen, even though it had no military defenses. Buildings collapsed. Streets turned into fire. Screams filled the air. Jakob woke to the sound of explosions. Windows shattered. He grabbed Anna and ran outside. Smoke covered the town. The school he taught in was burning. Children cried for their parents. Parents searched through rubble for their children. This was not a border clash. This was war. On the same morning, German tanks crossed into Poland from multiple directions. The attack was fast, powerful, and merciless. It was called Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Planes bombed from the sky, while tanks and soldiers crushed everything on the ground. Poland fought bravely, but it was outmatched. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had officially begun. The world reacts too late. Across Europe, people listened to radios in shock. Some cried. Others prayed. Many simply sat in silence, remembering the horrors of the last war. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain spoke to the nation, announcing that Britain was at war with Germany. Crowds gathered in streets, knowing dark days were coming. In Paris, soldiers marched again. In Berlin, people cheered. For many Germans, Hitler's war felt like revenge and rebirth. For the rest of the world, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Lives changed forever. Back in Poland, Jakob's world was destroyed within days. German forces advanced rapidly. Refugees filled the roads. Food became scarce. Fear ruled every moment. Jakob tried to protect his students, but schools were closed. Teachers became useless. Survivors became targets. As a Jewish man, Jakob knew the danger was even greater. German soldiers posted new laws. Jewish families were forced to register. Businesses were seized. Yellow stars would soon be required. Anna begged Jakob to flee east. "We can't stay," she said. "This is only the beginning." She was right. A storm spreads across Europe. Within weeks, Poland fell. The country was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. The speed of victory shocked the world. But Hitler was not finished. His eyes were on all of Europe. While soldiers prepared for new invasions, civilians everywhere sensed the same fear. This war would not be short. This war would not be limited. This war would change everything. For Jakob Weiss, the teacher who believed war belonged to history, the lesson had come too late. The storm had arrived, and there was no escape from its shadow. Part 2, Fire Across the World. The fall of Poland shocked Europe, but it did not stop the war. It only fed the fire. After Poland was defeated in weeks, Hitler turned west. For months, an uneasy silence spread across Europe. Soldiers waited. Civilians prayed. Newspapers called it the phony war, a war without fighting. But behind closed doors, Germany was preparing something terrifying. In April 1940, the silence ended. The Blitzkrieg returns. German forces attacked Denmark and Norway, securing control of the seas and supply routes. The world barely had time to react when, in May, Hitler launched his next move. German armies smashed into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, drawing Allied forces forward. But it was a trap. Instead of attacking heavily defended areas, German tanks pushed through the Ardennes forest, a route the Allies believed was impossible for large armies. Within days, German forces were behind enemy lines. The result was chaos. French and British soldiers were surrounded. Civilians fled their homes with whatever they could carry. Roads were packed with refugees, bombed from the air as they ran. In just 6 weeks, France collapsed. Paris falls. On June 14, 1940, German troops marched into Paris. The city of art, culture, and freedom fell without a fight. Nazi flags flew over the Eiffel Tower. For many, it felt like the end of the world. Families were split apart. Resistance groups began forming in secret. Ordinary people were forced to live under occupation, afraid, silent, watched. In Berlin, Hitler celebrated. Europe was kneeling. Only one nation stood against him. Britain stands alone. Across the English Channel, Britain prepared for invasion. Winston Churchill, the new Prime Minister, addressed the nation with words that would become history. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." Germany began the Battle of Britain in the summer of 1940. Day after day, German planes bombed airfields, factories, and cities. London burned. Fires lit up the night sky. Children were sent away to the countryside. Families slept in underground stations. Sirens became part of daily life. Yet Britain did not break. Against all odds, the Royal Air Force held the skies. German losses increased. By autumn, Hitler postponed his invasion. It was his first major failure. The war was no longer easy. A new front, the East. In June 1941, Hitler made a decision that would seal his fate. He turned on his former ally and invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa was the largest invasion in history. Millions of German soldiers crossed into Russian territory. At first, it seemed unstoppable. Soviet forces were pushed back. Cities fell. Villages burned. But Russia was vast, and winter was coming. As temperatures dropped, German soldiers froze. Supplies failed. Russian resistance hardened. The war in the East became brutal beyond imagination. Still, the world's attention was about to shift even further. December 7, 1941, a date that changed everything. On a quiet Sunday morning in the Pacific, Japanese planes appeared over Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Without warning, bombs and torpedoes rained down on the American fleet. Battleships burned. Sailors drowned. In 2 hours, more than 2,400 Americans were dead. The United States was stunned. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation, calling it a date which will live in infamy. America entered the war. Germany declared war on the United States shortly after. What had begun as a European conflict was now a true world war. The war expands everywhere. Fighting spread across North Africa, where German General Rommel clashed with British forces in the desert. In the Pacific, Japan captured islands at terrifying speed. In Asia, civilians suffered under occupation. No corner of the world was untouched. Factories worked day and night. Women replaced men in jobs. Children grew up without fathers. Letters from the front carried hope or heartbreak. Back in occupied Europe, resistance fighters sabotaged railways, hid Jews, and passed secret messages. Knowing discovery meant death. Jacob's journey continues. For Jakob Weiss, escape from Poland led to constant fear. He and Anna moved from village to village, hiding their identity. Each German checkpoint felt like a death sentence. One night, Jakob whispered, "The world is burning." Anna replied quietly, "But it hasn't ended yet." They did not know it then, but the war was about to reach its most violent phase. The fire had spread across the world, and the darkest battles were still ahead. By 1942, the world felt trapped in endless darkness. Everywhere, the war demanded more soldiers, more cities, more lives. Maps were covered in arrows and flags, but behind every mark were families waiting for news that might never come. For the Axis powers, victory still seemed possible. For the Allies, survival itself felt uncertain. But history was quietly preparing to turn. The battle for survival. On the Eastern Front, German forces pushed deep into the Soviet Union. Their goal was simple: destroy Russia before winter. Cities fell one after another. Civilians were executed or starved. Entire villages disappeared from a map. The German army reached Stalingrad, a city that carried the Soviet leader's name and enormous symbolic value. Hitler demanded its capture at any cost. What followed was one of the most brutal battles in human history. Street by street, room by room, soldiers fought inside burning factories and frozen ruins. Snipers hunted from broken windows. Bodies froze where they fell. Winter arrived with deadly force. German soldiers lacked warm clothing and food. Supplies failed. The Soviet army surrounded the city, cutting off escape. By February 1943, the once proud German Sixth Army surrendered. It was the first total German defeat of the war. The myth of Nazi invincibility was shattered. Hope rises in the desert. While Stalingrad burned, another turning point was forming far to the south. In North Africa, German General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, had pushed British forces back again and again. Control of the desert meant control of oil and supply routes. But in late 1942, Allied forces regrouped. At the Battle of El Alamein, British troops stopped Rommel's advance. Soon after, American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria. Caught between two armies, German and Italian forces began to collapse. For the first time, the Allies were no longer retreating. They were advancing. War at sea and in the air. Across the oceans, the battle for control was relentless. German submarines, U-boats, hunted Allied ships in the Atlantic, cutting off vital supplies. Every convoy crossing the sea was a gamble with death. But new technology, better coordination, and sheer determination slowly reduced the U-boat threat. In the air, massive bombing campaigns began. Cities like Hamburg and Cologne were reduced to ruins. Civilians paid the price as the war became total. No one was safe. The Pacific turns. In the Pacific, Japan had expanded rapidly, capturing islands and crushing resistance. Many believed the Japanese Empire could not be stopped. Then came Midway. In June 1942, the U.S. Navy intercepted Japanese plans and set a trap. In just a few days, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers, ships it could not replace. The balance of power shifted. From that moment, Japan would fight defensively. The long road back had begun. The cost of turning the tide. Victory did not come without suffering. Hospitals overflowed. Prisoner of war camps were filled with starving men. Civilians endured bombing, occupation, and fear. Resistance fighters were executed in public to spread terror. For Jakob Weiss, survival was a daily struggle. He and Anna found shelter with a farming family in occupied France. Jacob worked in the fields by day and taught children in secret at night. Education is resistance, he told them. Every knock on the door could mean arrest. Every stranger could be a traitor. Yet people helped each other, sharing food, hiding the hunted, refusing to surrender their humanity. A world begins to believe again. By late 1943, something had changed. Allied factories produced tanks, planes, and ships in numbers never seen before. Soldiers were better trained. Leaders planned carefully. The Axis powers were still dangerous, but no longer unstoppable. In whispered conversations and hidden radios, people began to say words they had not dared speak before. Maybe we can win. But the hardest battles still waited ahead. Europe remained under occupation. Millions were still trapped behind enemy lines. To end the war, the Allies would have to return to the heart of Nazi-controlled territory. And that would require the greatest invasion the world had ever seen. The tide had turned. Now, it was time to push forward. By 1944, the world had been at war for nearly 5 years. Entire generations knew nothing but sirens, ration cards, and loss. Cities stood broken. Families counted the empty chairs at dinner tables. Yet, for the first time, the end felt possible. The Allies had pushed back on every major front, but one final blow was needed to break Nazi Germany. That blow would come from the West, preparing for the impossible. Across southern England, something enormous was taking shape. Camps filled the countryside. Airfields buzzed with activity. Ships crowded harbors. Soldiers from America, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations trained together for one mission: return to Europe. The plan was called Operation Overlord. Its goal was simple and terrifying: to land thousands of soldiers on the heavily defended beaches of Nazi-occupied France and open a new front. Failure would mean disaster. Success could end the war. For months, planners studied tides, weather, and German defenses. Fake armies were created to confuse the enemy. Even many soldiers did not know where they were going until the last moment. They only knew the risk. June 6, 1944 D-Day. Before dawn, the sky filled with planes. Paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines, landing in darkness and chaos. Some drowned. Some were captured. Others regrouped and began attacking German positions. At first light, Allied ships opened fire. Then came the landing craft. As ramps dropped, soldiers ran into a storm of bullets. Beaches were covered with smoke, blood, and fear. Many fell before taking a single step. Yet they kept coming. At Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, and Sword Beaches, courage overcame terror. Medics dragged wounded men through gunfire. Officers led charges, knowing they might not survive the next second. By nightfall, the Allies had secured a foothold. Europe had been breached. Liberation and loss. After D-Day, fighting continued without rest. Hedgerows became deadly traps. Villages were fought over house by house. Civilians hid in cellars, praying for survival. Paris was liberated in August 1944. Crowds filled the streets, crying and cheering as Allied tanks rolled in. For many, it felt like a miracle. But the war was far from over. German forces launched one final counterattack in December, the Battle of the Bulge. In freezing forests, American soldiers were surrounded and outnumbered. Supplies ran low, yet they held their ground. The German army broke instead, closing in from both sides. From the east, the Soviet Union pushed relentlessly toward Germany. Cities like Warsaw and Budapest became battlegrounds. The cost was immense, but the Red Army did not stop. By early 1945, Germany was being crushed from both directions. Air raids destroyed factories and railways. Refugees flooded roads. Inside Germany, civilians realized the truth: this war was lost. For Jakob Weiss, freedom finally came as Allied forces reached his region in France. He and Anna stepped into the open without fear for the first time in years. "We survived," Anna whispered. But Jacob's eyes were heavy. At what cost? The fall of Berlin. In April 1945, Soviet forces surrounded Berlin. The city was in ruins. Children carried weapons. Old men were sent to fight. Bombs shook the ground day and night. Inside a bunker beneath the city, Adolf Hitler faced the end. On April 30th, 1945, he took his own life. Days later, Germany surrendered. Church bells rang across Europe. Crowds celebrated. Soldiers cried. The nightmare that had consumed a continent was finally over. But peace did not feel complete, because the war still raged in the Pacific. A world waiting for the end. As Europe breathed again, the world held its breath. Millions were dead. Millions more were homeless. Camps were discovered, places of horror that revealed the full scale of Nazi crimes. The question now was not just how to end the war, but how to rebuild humanity after it. One final chapter remained, and it would change the world forever. In May 1945, Europe celebrated freedom, but the world was still at war. While church bells rang in Paris and London, the Pacific burned. Across thousands of islands, American and Allied forces fought a determined and ruthless enemy. Japanese soldiers rarely surrendered. Civilians were caught in the middle, taught to fear capture more than death. The war refused to end quietly. A relentless Pacific war. Island by island, the Allies pushed forward. At Iwo Jima, American Marines fought for every inch of volcanic rock. The famous image of soldiers raising the flag masked a brutal truth. Nearly every defender fought to the death. At Okinawa, the fighting was even worse. Civilians were trapped between armies. Kamikaze pilots crashed their planes into ships. Thousands died in weeks of relentless combat. Military leaders feared that invading mainland Japan would cost millions of lives, soldiers and civilians alike. The question was no longer how to win. It was how to end the war. A new and terrifying weapon. In secret laboratories, scientists worked on a weapon unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Manhattan Project brought together brilliant minds under immense pressure. Their goal: harness the power of the atom. By summer 1945, the weapon was ready. On August 6, 1945, an American bomber dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In seconds, a city vanished in fire and light. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. Many more would die from burns and radiation. 3 days later, Nagasaki suffered the same fate. The destruction shocked the world. On August 15, 1945, Japan announced its surrender. World War II was over. Silence after the storm. The guns finally fell silent. Soldiers laid down weapons they had carried for years. Prisoners of war stumbled into freedom, thin and broken. Survivors searched ruins for family members who would never return. Celebrations erupted, but they were filled with tears. The cost of victory was impossible to measure. More than 60 million people had died. Cities across Europe and Asia lay in ashes. Entire communities had been erased, and the full horror of the war was still being discovered, revealing the unthinkable. As Allied forces liberated camps across Europe, the truth emerged. Places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Bergen-Belsen revealed a crime beyond imagination. Millions of Jews, along with Roma, disabled people, political prisoners, and others, had been murdered in a systematic genocide known as the Holocaust. The world stared in disbelief. How could this happen? People asked. The answer was painful. It happened step by step, through silence, fear, and hatred allowed to grow unchecked. For Jakob Weiss, liberation brought both relief and unbearable grief. His parents, taken years earlier, were never found. Many of his students were gone. He stood in a ruined classroom and whispered, "I must teach again." So this is never forgotten. Justice and a new order. After the war, surviving Nazi leaders were put on trial at Nuremberg. The world watched as crimes were named, documented, and judged. For the first time, leaders were held accountable for crimes against humanity. Nations also came together to form the United Nations, hoping to prevent future global conflict. New borders were drawn. New alliances formed. But the peace was fragile. A new tension, the Cold War, began to rise. The echo that never fades. World War II did not end in 1945. It lives on in memorials, history books, and family stories. It echoes in the ruins of cities rebuilt and in the warnings passed from one generation to the next. The war taught the world painful lessons. That democracy must be defended. That hatred leads to destruction. That silence can be deadly. And that ordinary people, teachers, farmers, students, can face extraordinary darkness with courage. Jakob Weiss returned to teaching, standing before a new generation. On his classroom wall hung a simple message. Remember, so it never happens again. The war ended, but its echo remains.